Hello, my fellow comic book collectors. It's Alan, the Comic Collector Geek, and this is the Wednesday video where I basically talk about your questions, where you guys get to ask me whatever questions you want, and I do my best to try to answer them. I got some really great questions this week. We'll get right into it. First comes from Shane O.T. Voss, Voss, maybe. Can you rank your top 5 to 10, your choice, Golden Age artists? Well, there's actually probably about 100 artists that I can mention. There's just so many. And a lot of them I actually think are really great. And some of them would probably, like if you ask me this again, like 6 weeks later, when I forget which ones I chose from this time, I'd probably give you a different list. So each time, like, you'll get a different list. But my top 5 or so are pretty consistent. The top 10, the beyond the top 5 would be a little bit less consistent because there's like a lot of great ones, and there's a lot of great ones that I'm not going to be mentioning in this top 10. So Lily Renee, Wally Wood, Hy Fleshman, Sid Shores, Ken Bald. There's so many. Johnny Craig. Actually, I think I have Johnny Craig, but but there's a whole bunch that I'm not mentioning. Steve Ditko, Jack Kirby. There's some big ones that I'm not mentioning. So we'll get into the ones that I mentioned. As I said, the bottom 5 of them probably could be switched out with some of these other artists that I just mentioned, but we'll get into them. It's a pretty good list, I think. So number 10 is Johnny Craig. I just said, I forgot that I had his. When I think of Johnny Craig, I think of these really cool horror comics. His classic is actually the one that's up above. You cannot see it. I just realized it's not in frame, but it's the one where he's holding the head and, with the axe, the bloody axe in the head. That's probably his most famous cover. But I actually really like this cover as well. This is Vault of Horror number 35, and it's a Johnny Craig cover. Just a really great EC artist, most associated with EC Comics. And next, another artist that's associated with a particular group of comics is Bob Montana. And this is probably one of his most famous Good Girl art covers. This is Archie number 50. It's just a really great sweater cover. This is Bob Montana. And just a really great one. There's a bunch of artists that I probably could have mentioned from Archie that are really great. But Bob Montana is kind of like the king of Archie. So that's... And then we got another pretty major artist. This is Bernard Bailey, and he did a lot of great horror covers. He has a very unique style. When you see it, you kind of say, oh, okay, that's another Bernard Bailey. Just a really great one. This is kind of one of his more famous ones. This is Mr. Mystery number 12. It's just the eyeball cover where he's getting poked in the eye. This is a really great cover. Hot poker to the eye. So, and then another really great EC artist is Jack Davis. There's actually a bunch of covers that I really like of Jack Davis. This is one of them. I just like this mummy kind of pretending to be sexy a little bit, even though she's like really kind of freaky looking. And then you get this, it's almost like, reminds me of like a freak show. You got the two-headed guy in the background and just a bunch of interesting elements to the circus freaks kind of thing. So this is Tales from the Crypt number 33, and it's a Jack Davis cover. Another artist that I talk about quite a lot on this channel, and it's just because he was very prolific, is Charles Biro. I always mispronounced his name before. Like I finally learned how to pronounce his name. It's Biro, not Biro. So if you were French, you would pronounce it Biro. But but he's not French, so he pronounces it Biro. So I've learned to pronounce it correctly. So this is Crime Does Not Pay, number 46. And the thing that's really great about Charles Biro is the fact that he does these, like, almost like a full story on his covers. Just these really crazy, over-the-top covers for the most part. Like I have a few behind me where the guy's getting shot in the eye, like bodies strewn about. Some really pretty crazy covers that Charles Biro did. This is another one of them where there's a lot of elements. So you just see a little girl and the guy with the ice cream, but there's a lot more to it. You can see all these guys in the car, and they're just preparing lots of nasty things that they're going to do to this poor little girl. So obviously they're going to kidnap her. So just a really interesting one. This is Crime Does Not Pay, number 46, Charles Biro cover. One artist that's actually kind of interesting that I really like, and he was kind of an EC artist, but also he had a lot of great stuff before he became an EC artist. He was more of a good girl artist, and that's what I really enjoyed of his art, is Al Feldstein. And Al Feldstein just does these really great good girl comics. When he became an EC artist, he kind of moved away from this, but I really liked his good girl art stuff that was before. So this is Junior, number 16. Also, it's a great roller coaster cover. Al Feldstein actually got in trouble with, he was mentioned in The Seduction of the Innocent. When I say get in trouble, he got in trouble with Frederick Wortham for his headlight covers, and this is an example of that headlight cover. So yeah, this is Al Feldstein, Junior, number 16. Another really big artist from the Golden Age is Jack Kamen, and this is one of Jack Kamen's most famous covers. It's this, this is Brenda Starr, number 14, and it's just a great cover. It's like the girl's like tapping out SOS with, like, it looks like a horseshoe, and she's in bondage, and just her clothes are all ripped. Just so much going on, lots of storytelling with very little. It's kind of opposite of Biro. Very little detail in terms of things happening, but so much. It's still, there's so many elements to his work. Another artist kind of known for doing good girl art was Jack Kamen. Whenever Fox Publications, or Fox Feature Syndicate, I should say, would ask, would want like a good girl art cover, they would either ask Jack Kamen or another artist, and I'm going to get to that other artist in a second. So Jack Kamen, really great good girl artist. That's one of his classic covers. One of my favorite artists, so these top three are my three biggest favorite artists from the Golden Age, is L.B. Cole. And this is one of his classic covers. This is Power Comics number 3. It's just a really cool one. What L.B. Cole is kind of known for is these crazy colors. This is not actually a great example of the crazy colors. A lot of the ones that L.B. Cole did were very orange, very orange colors. This is more yellow and black, but it still gives you a sense of L.B. Cole's style. Very, very obvious style. You almost feel like it's of a different era, where you'd expect it to be like these sort of blacklight comics or something like, or posters or something like that. So this is L.B. Cole. This is Power Comics number 3. And then we got the other artists. So Jack Kamen, they would either ask, or this artist, which is Matt Baker. So this is 7 Seas Comics, number 5. And really, Matt Baker's run on 7 Seas is kind of one of those runs where it's like great cover after great cover, and it's it's what he's kind of known for. These really great covers where it's sort of action is happening. You see the girl's hair; it's very elaborate. That's a really good telltale sign for Matt Baker. He was just a phenomenal artist of the Golden Age, and one of his most famous works is actually above me, which is Phantom Lady 17. This is a phenomenal piece of art. So yeah, just Seven Seas. The most famous is not this one. It's the one with the shark. But I really do like this one as well. I don't have the one that he's most famous for. But so this is Seven Seas Comics number 5. And my most favorite, I guess, my number 1 artist from the Golden Age. And he actually has multiple styles, I would say, for this artist. He is known for his good girl art. So this is Wonder Comics number 15. This is one of my favorite from the run. And this is Alex Schomburg. And sometimes he would sign his name X-E-L-A, so Alex backwards, Zila. He was just like really great artist. And this is one of his airbrush comics. So he did a bunch where there were airbrush covers. But another kind of bunch of comics that he's really, really well known for is his work on Captain America. And a lot of these wartime covers where he would put in so many details that really, he would really tell a story as well on his covers. The thing that was really great about Alex Schomburg is he would show details and he would label everything. So like the machines would have like death spray or like, and little knobs and stuff like that. It's just really cool stuff. Even with this one, you can kind of see that a bit where, you can see that he's got even the little, on the microscopes, how they have the little clamps. He has that. He also has all these little technical details. And it's just a really great art style. Another thing that's sort of a telltale sign is his heroes are always out of range. They always like trying to get there, but they're always a little bit late. And the good girl element is always present in his comics. It's just that's really what he's known for as well. These good girl art comics. The war ones are a little different. They're much more very strong propaganda covers, but this one I really like. So this is Wonder Comics number 15. So those are my top 10. As I said, the bottom group could be switched out. There's so many great artists like that I didn't even mention. So yeah, there's just a ton of artists. Shane asked another question as well. Comic book restoration used to be a good thing. Do you think the general viewpoints of collectors will shift back to neutral or positive? Okay, so I've actually had lots of discussions about this, and probably like the idea that I liked the most, and I was speaking to my friend Steve Gettner about this, and I kind of liked his take on it, and I kind of have my own take mixed in. But the idea is this, that when the grading companies came out, a lot of the time it's kind of like a used car comics in a way. So with a used car, if you ever watched the movie Matilda, there's this scene where the father is teaching his daughter the used car business. And he's saying, hey, if you put sand into the engine, which would destroy the engine, by the way, it sounds smoother at first. Okay, of course, the whole car will be like destroyed afterwards, but it'll sound smoother at the for the first couple of kilometers. If you take a power drill and run it backwards, you can put the odometer back on the car. He was showing her all these kind of tactics, which really made the car look great, but in actuality, the car was very much used and very, very much older and not in good state as it presented. And I think a lot of things, when comic buyers first got their slabs, and all of a sudden they were getting these purple labels it was the same experience. That experience of being ripped off by a used car salesman, where you feel like, oh, they didn't mention that there was like color touch, or that pieces were added, or that the centerfold was married, or the cover was married, or all these things that kind of made people question the comics. Um, if that was disclosed before buying, I think people would be more comfortable with it. So that was the shadiness that was associated with restoration that really threw people off, and that's why it immediately got that bad taste in people's mouths, because when the first purple labels were added, people were all of a sudden seeing covers trimmed, color touch, all these things that they didn't expect in their comics, and it just made people very wary of purple labels, and so much so that purple labels became really cheap. Like, there's, if you look at high grade comics of like pretty major keys, they were like a tenth or even sometimes a 20th of the value of a blue label in the same grade. And it's because the collectors are so afraid. Now, here is where the future comes into play. What happens is, you can, like, I just showed a really great comic. This is a good example of a really great comic. This is Wonder Comics again. It's an 8.0 restored, okay? I knew that it was an 8.0 restored when I bought it. I bought it in the slab. I actually bought it from a really great guy, Keston. He sold it to me. And he sold it to me for a great price. And I was happy with the price that I paid, and I was happy that it was restored. Okay, like, it sounds weird to say, oh, I was happy with restoration. I'd prefer it to be a blue label, obviously, but I didn't mind the restoration. Okay, I'd actually, if I had the ability to remove any restoration where, it's color touch and it would just have like weird holes all over the place, maybe it's a 6.0 instead of an 8.0, I would prefer the 8 than the 6, because it looks better, it presents, so much better, and, you can't really see the restoration, for the most part. So the point is, what I'm seeing nowadays is people, when the book's are already slabbed, it's already got that restoration, and people know exactly what it is because the label says exactly what has been done to the book. When people are going into that book with open eyes, they can often pay what they think is a fair price, knowing the situation of that comic. And often what will happen is, I've seen there's a shift where restored comics are actually kind of creeping up in value. They're not like, and like, you get people like me promoting it, and get other channels that are promoting the idea of buying restored books, because I always see that as, first of all, I see it as a bargain. You can finally get a book that you couldn't normally afford at a great price because it's restored. When I bought my Wonder Woman 1 is a good example of this. A Wonder Woman 1, the book that I have, is probably worth $120,000. But I bought it restored, so it was like a tenth of that. Okay, so the point is, it allowed me to buy a really great book at a really great price. And what you'll find is, over time, people will say, okay, well, it's too good of a price. It doesn't make sense that the restored book is selling for less than a 0.5 would sell for. It just doesn't make any sense. Why, so after a while, like, what you'll see is restored books gradually going up, and people will be a little bit more discerning about the type of restoration within those books. So if there's huge restoration where it's really a Frankenstein situation where the book is barely the original book, then probably those kind of books will not command that much money, compared to something where it's slight color touch, could be removed if you really wanted to, but it might make the book not present as well. So there is like differences in there, or even trimming. Like, if it's like slight trimming, like where it's like, frayed edge that's been trimmed, people might be like, really? Is that really that bad? It's one of those things where a lot of the time, you really have to, when you go in open-eyed in terms of what you're getting, you can make that decision for yourself. And I think more and more collectors are seeing the value of restored books. Now, you started your question out with a really good point, that comic restoration used to be considered a good thing. And that was, again, open-eyed. And the difference is, what I was talking about was the used car salesman element, where at first people were getting shocked that their books were restored. But there was a point where people, if they had a really big book, like Superman 1, or Action Comics 1, or Wonder Woman 1, or Sensation 1, whatever big book it was, they would take that book and get it professionally restored so they would present as beautifully as possible. And then it was considered a good thing. And people would spend lots of money, actually, to get those books restored and make them look as beautiful as possible. So it was considered a good thing. But again, that's an open-eyed approach, that they know what they're getting into. They know what they're doing to the book. And when they would sell it, actually, they would denote that it was professionally restored by some professional restorer. And a lot of those restorers, even, you almost have a brand where you'd say, hey, look, this is done by XYZ restorer that's just the best at doing these kind of restorations. So that was a very different way of viewing restoration back then. Again, that changed with the whole idea of the CGC slabs, where all of a sudden people were getting surprised, where there was a bit of that used car salesman element to restoration. So I hope that answers the question. I do believe that it is shifting, where people are saying, well, the restored books are, as valuable, or sometimes even more valuable than books of similar quality in a blue label. And, I think there is that change. There is that shift, especially at the lower grades. You'll notice there's really not much difference. Like a 0.5 restored versus a 0.5 blue label. What difference does it make at that point? In the low grades, it really doesn't matter too much. And in the older books, it really doesn't matter too much. The newer books, people, there's just so many that people can choose from. So that's another thing I really have to mention before I go off onto the next question. In the Golden Age, and maybe even in the Silver Age, restoration is becoming less and less a thing, because so many of the books were restored and have to be restored just to be maintained, conserved or restored, something to just maintain the books so they won't fall apart. With the modern era books, there's no excuse for restoration, or there's no excuse to buy restored books, because you can buy another 1,000 different 9/8 that are on the census. There's enough variety out there, enough selection out there that restored books can be a little bit less valuable, just because of the fact that there's just enough blue labels out there that you can always pick up a blue label rather than that restored book. There are exceptions to that, where you get some of these high valued, like Bronze Age books like Hulk 181. There are some big books that have that kind of level where people will buy the restored just to be able to afford it, compared to the blue labels. So there's always caveats to anything that is said, exceptions to the rule. But that's just something I wanted to put in there as well. Okay, let's get into the next question. Next question comes from, I mentioned him actually, my good friend Steve Gettner. He actually has a couple questions for me. This is from Stepify. What Pedigrees books do you have in your collection? Well, I actually have a bunch. And he's going to ask me more questions about Pedigree, but I'll just show a couple of my Pedigree books. And I've shown these so many times, I kind of feel weird showing them so much. But this is Crown Comics number 3. And it's a really nice presenting book. Has some Matt Baker art. It's got the first appearance of Vuda in it, so it's kind of a key book. He was the first black hero in comics. So kind of a cool book. So I have that one, which is from the Promise collection, and I'll get into the Promise collection in a second. And this is another book from the Promise collection. This is Crime Detective Comics number 9, and it has right there Frederick Wortham on the cover. This is the first cover appearance of Frederick Wortham, who is the writer of The Seduction of the Innocent. And it's sort of, they don't call him Frederick Wortham, but basically is Frederick Wortham. Not so subtle, thing about him where he's in bondage and gagged as well, because they were really upset about what Frederick Wortham was doing to the comic book industry. So that's Crime Detective Comics number 9, and these are both from the Promise collection. Now, the Promise collection is one of my favorite pedigrees, and I'll get into that in 1 second. Which pedigrees do you think are the very best in condition and titles within them? So that's the second part of this multi-part question. So the biggest collections, the two biggest pedigrees, are the Edgar Church, or also known as the Mile High collection, which had about 15,000 super high grade copies. Like, they were just if you ever look at high grade copies on the census especially for Golden Age, they're usually Mile High copies. Like, some of the highest, the highest graded copy of Superman 1, or actually I don't even think it's been graded yet, is a Mile High copy. Action Comics, all these really big titles. So big titles and super high grades were Mile High. So, and it was the biggest collection ever found. The second biggest collection was the Davis Crippen D collection. It has like this D. It's been like on the first page he would write a D on it. That's how he marked all of his books. They are super high grade. There's about 13,000 books in that collection. Actually, it's a pretty interesting story because 2,000 of those Crippen ones were stolen, and had sort of been kind of put into the marketplace, but people found them and sort of brought them back in, and they got labeled as being part of this massive collection of Golden Age comics. So, yeah, those are the two biggest, and they have some of the best comics that you see, and you just see them all the time. Well, not all the time, but you see them fairly often because they are usually the highest graded copies of the books. Now, another really great collection is the Gaines collection, which is just an insane collection because it's what William Gaines or Bill Gaines did was he was the owner of EC Comics, and he basically put aside 9 copies of every book that they ever published. so these are, and they would wrap them in these kind of brown paper wrap, and so they were really protected. They were just protected, and they were 12 copies of every single title in EC. So you get so if you can think of any great title in EC or a great book, well, it's in that collection, and there's 12 of them at high grades. So just amazing collection from the creator, which is very unusual. Usually when we see pedigrees, we think of these private collectors who bought the books off the shelf, kept them in super high grade, barely read them, preserved them really, really well, and that's what makes them a pedigree, because they're these really rare books in high grade, and just big collections. Well, the Mile High is kind of, not the Mile High, but the Gaines collection is kind of like that, but it's, instead of being a private collector, it is the actual publisher, which is very unusual. Which are the best pedigrees in your opinion is the next part of this question, and why? There's 2 that I really like just because of the story behind them. And one is the pedigree of the Promise collection, which I just showed 2 books from my collection from. And the reason I like the Promise collection is it's got a cool story. It's like the pedigree is this, that two brothers go to war. One has a comic collection, and the brother said, "Hey, can you, if anything happens to me, you got to promise me you got to take care of my comics." And the brother kept the promise after his brother died in the war. So you know, it's got that kind of sentimentality to it. It has this, you know, cool story. This was the Korean War. It was a, you know, pretty sad thing that his brother died, and he, you know, all of a sudden he has his comics and he kept them until he died himself. So many years later. So just a really kind of a cool one because it's that promise, and that's the appeal of the collection. Another collection that's really cool, and for a different reason, again, war related, is the Okajima Okajima collection. And that was basically this girl, young girl, that was in one of the internment camps. So she was like, you know, she was Japanese, and she was being basically kept in Camp 4T Camp 1, like 4T Camp 1, and that's labeled on the books. So there's actually a couple different phases to her collection, where she collected before she got put in the camp, during when she was in the camp, and after, and she collected into the 50s. So her collection, the ones that most people kind of really want, are the ones where she's in the internment camp. And you know, those books command a fair amount of money. But the fact is that she was still collecting while being like in prison, like basically in prison. It's just amazing to me. And the fact that she was able to maintain the books at a really high grade. As I said, one of the things that makes a pedigree is the fact that the books are in high grade. And she did an excellent job of keeping these books in super high grade. So very cool. I kind of like I'd love to own one of those Jima. I should know. I should speak. I speak a little bit of Japanese. I should know better. Okajima. You know, I'd love to have one of those ones in my collection. But yeah, I don't. So yeah, those are the ones that I think are the coolest. Yeah, that's that question. Next question from the same person is, who were L.B. Cole's colorists for his career, especially the wild color palette issues? So L.B. Cole, I showed him when I was showing the top 10 books. And I said he's really known for these bright orange, very crazy colors. Like just, I wish I brought more L.B. Coles to show, but really great covers that he did. And L.B. Cole was his own colorist for the most part. He did pretty much all of his own covers. I thought maybe he didn't do the colors for when he did Classics Illustrated Junior comics, but even those he did the colorist. He was the colorist for. So he actually was his own colorist. I think he was a bit of a perfectionist, and he really wanted to control his own art style. However, there are a few books that were not colored by L.B. Cole. And it really starts out with his earliest books. So if you look at Terrific Comics number 3, which is L.B. Cole's first cover, the colorist is unknown, and it doesn't really look like L.B. Cole's style. If you look at number 6, it also says colorist unknown, but it looks a little bit more like his style. So it was L.B. Cole that did the coloring for 6, but it's questionable. We don't know because it's not known. But generally, for the most part, L.B. Cole did his own coloring. So you know, he did his pencils, inks, and coloring. Okay, so those are that's all I could find out. It's really hard to find out information about it, but I did look up a bunch of books that I thought maybe were not colored by him, and it turned out they were actually colored by L.B. Cole. Okay, K. Munin wrote, are there any particular Vampirella comics that you would recommend? Yeah, I would actually recommend, if you're going to buy Vampirella, and I'm a big Vampirella fan. If you ask me what are my favorite female superheroes, number one is Vampirella. I actually really like Vampirella. Number two would be Wonder Woman. So just to give you a sense. Now, Vampirella really started out in Warren Publishing, so in a magazine format. And those are the ones that I'm going to recommend because that is classic Vampirella. And that's the one I most associate with myself. That's the books that I read as a university student. And I was a big collector of those Warren Publishing. So I'm biased towards those ones. I also collected the Harris ones like Vengeance of Vampirella, and I like those as well. But the Warren ones I really enjoyed. Now, here's the thing with Warren Vampirella. You want to get issues from 8 to like 20 some odd. You know, those ones are like, that sort of run of Vampirella is kind of cool in terms of just keys after keys and just so many cool things happening. Very major storylines. I kind of say it's similar to Amazing Spider-Man. If you look at like Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 10, pretty much every major character is introduced within his rogue gallery. Jonah Jameson is mentioned. Like all of the major players within Peter Parker's life are kind of developed within those first 10 issues. Well, Vampirella is the same way. From 8 to 18, 11 issues, pretty much most of the major characters are introduced. So you got in number 8, where it's really her first serious story, where they're kind of making her a character in her own magazine. You know, you get introduced to her lover / nemesis, if that makes sense, Adam Van Helsing, and you know, who's her boyfriend, but also he's a vampire hunter, so he's trying to hunt her. And then you get introduced to his father as well. You get in number 9, you get to see her like developing, like they develop the blood serum by finding this cool book that teaches them how to make blood serum so that she doesn't need to rely on human blood anymore. In number 11, you get to meet her sidekick, which is Pendragon. And then in number 15, you get to meet Dracula. And in 16, you actually meet Dracula meets Vampirella. And in number 18, you get Lilith, who is her like mother. So you get all these characters that are being introduced. And 30, you actually get to meet Pantha, which is another major character for Vampirella. But the point is, in those few issues, within like 11 issues, you get to meet all the major kind of key people that are going to make Vampirella, you know, the character that she is. And, you know, all of her rogues, all of her major partners or relationships that she's going to have. You know, so those are the ones I'd recommend. So from 8 to 18, those are the ones. So, and they're great covers. They're great, and you know, fun, campy interiors as well. So Vampirella 8 through 18. The funny thing is, even though those are big books in terms of Vampirella, the prices are so cheap. I'm always amazed how inexpensive those Vampirellas can be. You can pay usually anywhere from $20 to $50 for a reasonably good copy of those Vampirellas. Undervalued, in my opinion, because I think Vampirella is great. Okay, last question comes from Martin Bowe. And Martin Bowe is also known as the Aussie comic collector. You got to check out his channel. You know, recommend checking out his channel. He's always in like this, he's always in this room where he's just surrounded by long boxes. And it's a really cool way that he films his videos. So definitely check him out, Martin Bowe. Okay, but he asked, if you could interview golden age artists like Charles Biro or Lee Elias, another one I should have mentioned in the top 10, great artist. What would be your first question? So one of the things that I always like to ask, and I actually, if you watch my interview series where I'm interviewing artists, I always ask this one question first. Did you collect comics as a kid? And you probably think, oh, that's kind of a lame question, actually. But the reason I ask that is I like kind of getting that mood out of the artist. So a lot of the time when people talk to artists, they'll ask about some comic that they did, or how they got into art or something like that, or they'll ask those kind of questions where it's sort of different. It's just it sets a certain mood with the artist. But the reason I ask, did you collect comics, is, or did you read comics as a kid or something like that, where I want to know what was the true inspiration for them getting into comic art. And sometimes when I interview like these artists, like they say, oh, I didn't collect comics as a kid. And I can see that they don't have that spark. They really lack the spark. When I interviewed Bill Morrison about, comic art, and that's a really great interview. I recommend you watch that interview because it was a really great interview. He's the one that did Futurama and Simpsons comics. I asked him, did you collect comics as a kid? And he got very excited. You could see that spark, that love of comics, that, and that kind of reflection back to your childhood, where you think about, oh, the first time you read whatever comic it was. And for him, it was Batman, that he was really in love with Batman. He even, got into a big story about how he dressed up as Batman. It was just a really, you could see that the mood changed with the interview, because you got to see him just be a lover of comics rather than, I'm being interviewed, I have to be serious and blah, 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 be sophisticated or anything. It was just like, it brings back the child in us, because we're old now. It brings back that childhood memories and that love and passion for the books that they're creating. So that's really the first question I like to ask. It's kind of my icebreaker question. And it really, I find it sets them up in terms of really reflecting on their passion for the hobby. So it's a question I always ask. And I think it works. So that's it for this week. If you have a question that you'd like to ask me, put it in the comments below and I will do my best to answer it. So thanks again for watching. Bye for now.